Hello and welcome to the Heffy Doodle YouTube channel. My name is Lauren and I'm going to be sharing how I created this shadow box card today. I'm starting with my big shadow box die, and I've already die cut my pieces out of some Heffy Doodle colored cardstock. We have simply Teal-icious, and that's going to be the two pieces that create our box. And I also die cut the center out of it so we have a window. We also have this beautiful purple colored cardstock, which is grape soda, and that's going to be a frame around the opening of our box. I also used Greenbean and some white cardstock to create a cloud and some grass. And then I kept my rectangles that were die cut from my frame and my box, and I'm going to use those in the shadow box as well. I've already stamped, colored, and die cut the Quack Me Up clear stamps. I'm creating a really cute little rainy day scene using these images inside of my shadow box. So let's get started with what needs to take the longest to dry. I'm going to be doing a little bit of stenciling. So I'm going to take that teal colored cardstock that die cut from my shadow box, and I'm lining it up with some of the raindrops from the Rain on My Parade stencil. I'm going to use a little bit of my Heffy tape to help keep that rectangle right where I want it on the back side of my stencil. And then I'm just going to use this little mat to help me from keeping my space from getting too messy. I grabbed some stencil butter. This is pearl white from the Crafter's Workshop, and I'm just using a palette to scoop some of that stencil butter onto my stencil and then wiping off the excess so I can save it for later. And here is a fun little stencil reveal. I have some really pretty shiny raindrops on my background now. So now we're going to move into assembling the shadow box. I'm going to stamp a sentiment that will be used on the back of my shadow box. So I'm going to use that extra purple paper. And I grabbed a sentiment from that same stamp set, Quack Me Up, and I'm going to emboss it in some white embossing powder. So I'm just using some anti-static powder, and then I'm going to use some embossing ink, and I'm going to pour on some white embossing powder. I just think white on top of colored cardstock is really pretty, and it really pops off because this purple cardstock is a little bit darker. So I'm pouring on that white embossing powder. I do 2 coats just because I want to make sure I get everything covered as best as I can. And then I'm just going to use my heat gun here to melt that embossing powder down. And I did notice there were a couple spots where I didn't get the best coverage, but that's okay. I'm going to use a white gel pen and just kind of add in those letters that didn't really come through with the embossing powder. Super great. So now I'm done with that. I'm going to grab my double-sided adhesive rolls as well as some wet glue, my little glue burt, and we're going to start assembling this box. So I'm starting with scoring all of the sides, so anything where the die created a score line, and I'm going to grab some 1/4 inch double-sided adhesive as well as 1/8 of an inch double-sided adhesive. The tabs on our box are a little bit wider, so I can use my 1/4 inch, but the tabs on my cloud and my grass that I'm going to use to add some dimension and create my scene inside of my shadow box are a little bit thinner. So I'm going to add my purple frame first using my glue burt. So I'm just adding some glue on all 4 sides of this frame, and then I will glue that around the opening on the front of my shadow box. I'm using my glue burt just because it gives me a little bit of wiggle room to make sure that I get it perfectly lined up where I want it before it is completely stuck and I won't be able to move it around. So now, like I said, I'm grabbing the 1/4 inch and I'm going to glue the 2 sides of my box together. So I'm just adding some adhesive to the tab. I decided to do 2 because the tab is a little wide, and I just want to make sure that my shadow box stays together and doesn't come apart. So to glue these together, I'm just lining up the edges and then folding that tab down. But before I close up my box, I want to add the inside details of my shadow box. So I'm going to start with gluing down my background now that my raindrops are dry. I'm just going to use my glue burt again to help me with putting this inside the background. And I'm going to line it up right next to that folded tab because it is the perfect width to make sure that my background is centered. And then I'm going to grab that 1/8 of an inch adhesive and I'm going to add it to the sides of my grass and the tabs and the tabs of my clouds as well. So just using a scoring tool to help me with making sure I have really nice creases on all of my scored die cuts. So I'm going to pretty much the same way I did with the other tab. I'm just going to add some adhesive to the green, my grass, and I'm going to line it up with the bottom of my shadow box because this is a little taller of a hill. And I'm going about 1/3 of the way into the scene. So adding that to the side of my shadow box, just one side right now. And I'm going to repeat this process for the clouds, again, adding adhesive to one of the tabs. And this time I'm going to go about 2/3 of the way. So I'm creating, 3 sections, as you could say, in my shadow box. I have the front of it, then I have the grass, and then I'm going a little bit more and I have the clouds, and then the back side of my shadow box are my raindrops. So now that those are adhered, I'm going to use adhesive and I'm going to add more to the other side. So I have everything attached to one side now and I need to close up my box. So I added some adhesive to the other side of my grass, to the other side of my clouds, as well as on the side of my box to close it up. And I'm going to peel off all of the release paper and I'm going to lay everything flat like it's completely folded. And I'm going to start with closing one side and then closing the other, kind of like a map or like you're closing up a box, which is what this card is. It's a box. And I'm going to just make sure that I have some good adhesion to the other side, just using my scoring tool to really press down, make sure that both sides are really stuck together of my grass and my clouds. And there we have our little shadow box and everything in there seems to be fitting nicely. You could see that I have the, 2 sections inside, the grass and the clouds are further back. And now I'm going to add my sentiment, which will be on the back side of my card, so I can, sign this card later and give it to a friend or a family member. And now we can start adding in the fun part, which are all of the cute little stamped and die cut images. So I'm going to start with this little puddle. Again, I'm going to be using my glue Burt because it just gives me that little extra bit of wiggle room to make sure that my images are right where I want them before they are stuck and it's too difficult to move. And I'm also going to grab some tweezers and just make sure that I can easily get inside of my shadow box and add my images. Now, I probably could have added my images before I glued everything together, but I wanted to make sure I could see where everything was going to line up and be happy with where my images are. And I just thought that would be easier when everything was closed and I could really get better placement of where my clouds and where my grass was going to be. I glued my sun to the back side of my clouds, so he's kind of peeking out a little bit. It is rainy, but maybe the sun is starting to come through. And then I also have some clouds, so I'm going to add those to the background, just placing them in the openings of my stenciled background. There's some areas that don't have any stencil paste, so I'm just using my tweezers and my glue, and I'm adding clouds to those open areas all the way on the back. I'm not using any foam adhesive, which you can if you'd like to, but I decided not to use any foam adhesive. That way my box would lay as flat as it could with all of these different layers of paper. I'm gluing this cute little purple umbrella to one of the wings of my big duck here, my white duck. And then I'm going to add that into my scene. I'm going to have this duck. I thought about putting them on the front. You can see here I'm contemplating it, but I am going to put them on the grass with the umbrella off to the right so that way it doesn't block the sun, and just adding some adhesive to the duck's little feet so that way it will stick to the grass. Now sometimes I get a little bit too much glue and so I just use my finger to tap off any excess glue so I don't get a big blob of glue on my card. I'm using my tweezers just to help apply pressure and make sure my duck is really secure to that green cardstock. And then my last little image is this little baby duckling who's going to be sitting in the little puddle, and I'm going to add them in. Now, because I did get some glue on my fingers, obviously I'm using my hands to tap off some of the glue. I got glue in one of the corners of my purple frame that I wasn't too happy about. So once I'm all done, I do add in some enamel dots to the corners of my frame, so you'll see those in the final picture. But here is a final look at this adorable little shadow box. This really inspired me to want to make more of these shadow boxes. They just turned out so cute, and I don't know why I haven't been making more of them. So I hope this inspires you to grab your big shadow box die and create some shadow cards and some really adorable scenes with your Heffy Doodle stamps. So here's one more picture of the cute scene, and you can see those 4 yellow enamel dots. You can find everything I use down below in the description, as well as Heffy Doodle's social media, where you can find even more inspiration. Thanks for joining me. Bye.